Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Love of Biology. Let us discuss about the human respiratory system. So, respiration is one of the metabolic process which plays an important role in all the organisms. We know that. So, breathing is the first step in the respiration for almost all the organisms. The inhaling and exhaling of the gases and its mechanism depend on the environment in which the organism will live. So, the lower organisms like unicellular ones, they take up the oxygen, release carbon dioxide with the process of diffusion. So, annelids like earthworms have a moist cuticle which helps them in the gaseous exchange. Respiration in the fishes and other aquatic organisms have the gills for respiration, and most of the higher organisms possess a pair of lungs for the respiration. So, respiration is the process of taking in oxygen and giving out the carbon dioxide. There are two types of the respiration process in the human beings. So, external respiration and internal. Let us see one by one. External respiration involves the inhalation and exhalation of the gases, whereas the internal one involves the exchange of the gases between the blood and the cells. So next, respiration in the humans takes place through the lungs. It is the largest organ. We know that the air inhaled moves down the trachea into the lungs, where oxygen is exchanged for the carbon dioxide from the body tissues. So carbon dioxide will be exhaled. So next, respiratory tract in human beings is made up of the following parts: external nostrils for the intake of the air, and nasal chamber, which is lined with hair and mucus to filter the air and remove the dust and the dirt. It does not allow the other pathogens to enter into our respiratory system. So here you can see the external nostrils as well as the nasal cavity, nasal chambers. So after that, we can see the other organelles like pharynx. It is a passage between the nasal chamber and serves as a common passageway for both air and the food. Larynx, also known as a sound box, as it helps in the generation of the sound and thus helps us in a communication. Uh, so after these, so the next organelle which is present in the human respiratory system is epiglottis. It is a flap-like structure that covers the glottis and prevents the entry of food into the windpipe. Trachea. So it is a long tube passing through the mid-thoracic cavity, and bronchi. The trachea divides into the left and the right bronchi. After that, bronchioles. So the bronchi, each one is divided into finer channels. Those are the bronchioles, and alveoli. The bronchioles and end up into a balloon-like structures known as the alveoli. And the lungs. We have a pair of lungs which are sac-like structures and covered by a double-layered membrane. What is that double layered member called as pleura? So they're covered with the pleura. And structurally, if you see the nose, it is divided into the external portion, which is in fact termed as a nose, and the internal portion being the nasal cavities. Nose is the only visible part of the respiratory system, protruding from the face and lying in between the forehead and the upper lip. Opening, we call it as a nostril. Two nostrils are present for the exchange of the gases. So here you can see the nostrils which are separated by a septum. Two nostrils are separated by a septum, so which is a regular cavity actually divided into equal passages by a septum. The posterior bony part of the septum is found with the perpendicular plate of the bone, that is ethmoid bone and vomer. Anteriorly it consists of the hyaline cartilages. So it is made up of the septum. So next, coming to the nasal cavity, it is lined with a very vascular ciliated columnar epithelium which contains the goblet cells, that is they will secrete the mucus. What are the functions of this nasal passage? Actually prevent entry of the dust particles and warm the incoming air entering the nasal cavity, and also moisten the dry air. Along with that, olfactory receptor present. So these olfactory present in the roof of the nasal cavity we detect the smell and hold and sweep the microorganism entering the nasal chamber. So internal nares are the openings from the nasal cavity into the pharynx region. Pharynx, which is a passageway that extends from the posterior nares and runs behind the mouth, and larynx to the level of sixth thoracic vertebrae, where it becomes the esophagus. So these after this, so the pharynx is dividing. Actually, it is divided into three parts: an esopharynx posterior to the nasal chamber, oropharynx posterior to the mouth, and the laryngopharynx posterior to the larynx. So larynx. So these are three types of the pharynx. And the larynx, it is a voice box. Yeah, links the laryngopharynx and the trachea. It lies in front of the laryngopharynx and third, fourth, and fifth, sixth, and cervical vertebrae. Until puberty, there is a little difference in the size of the larynx between the sexes. So here you can see the larynx after pharynx. It is connecting the trachea. So both pharynx and trachea it is connecting. So in male it grows larger. So that's why we are calling it as Adam's apple, and then generally give the deeper voice in the male. So next, the larynx is composed of several irregular shaped cartilages attached to each other by the ligaments and the membranes. The main cartilages are the thyroid cartilage, cricoid, arytenoid cartilages, and the one epiglottis. So the vocal cords are two pale folds of the mucous membrane with cord-like free edges stretched across the laryngeal pharynx. They extend from the inner wall of the thyroid prominence anteriorly to the arytenoid cartilage posteriorly. So they will give the voice. So trachea. After passing through the pharynx, air passes into the windpipe. What is that windpipe called as? Trachea. So the trachea has a framework of the smooth muscles with about 16 to 20 open rings of cartilage shaped like a C. These rings will give the rigidity to the trachea. So C-shaped rings you can see after larynx in the trachea, which is a windpipe. So they will give rigidity to the trachea and ensure that it remains open. The opening of the trachea, there is a slit-like structure. We call it as a glottis. A thin flap of tissue called the epiglottis folds over the opening during swallowing and prevent the food to enter into that. After the upper end of the trachea, the several folds of cartilage form the voice box. So this is the epiglottis flap-like structure, vocal cords, so you can see. So they will form this. So human lungs, 300 million alveoli. So red blood cells pass through the capillaries in a single file and oxygen from each alveolus enters the red blood cells and binds to the hemoglobin. In addition, carbon dioxide contained in the plasma and red blood cells leaves the capillaries and enters the alveoli when breath is taken. Most carbon dioxide reaches the alveoli as bicarbonate ions and about 25% of it is bound loosely to the hemoglobin. So oxygen, so lungs function is exchange of the gases, taking in the oxygen and throwing out the carbon dioxide. So this will takes place. So carbon dioxide in the form of bicarbonate ions, so it will be passed. They will reach the alveolus. So alveolus is after bronchi, so in the lungs. So alveoli is present, which will help in the exchange of the gases. So this bicarbonate bind loosely to the hemoglobin. So here trachea, after trachea you can see the bronchus, which is divided into each lobe of the lung, right in the left lung. So you can see the bronchus, which is divided into bronchioles, and at the end region you can see the alveoli. So when person inhales, the rib muscles and the diaphragm will contract, thereby increasing the volume of the chest cavity, right? So this increase leads to the reduced air pressure in the chest cavity, and air rushes into the alveoli, forcing them to expand and fill. So the lungs passively obtain air from the environment by this process. So we know that passively means without any energy. During exhalation, the rib muscles will, the size will takes they will contract. So this is the alveolus. So structure, bronchus will divides into the capillaries. You can see alveolar duct, alveolus, so which helps in the exchange